What I'm about to reveal will shock anyone who thinks all American real estate is a good investment. But it needs to be said because there are 3 specific states that are experiencing complete economic, social, and fiscal collapse that will make property ownership there financially devastating for decades to come. These aren't temporary downturns or cyclical challenges that will recover in a few years. These are structural breakdowns driven by policies, demographics, and economic trends that are irreversible under current political leadership. Property owners in these states are about to experience wealth destruction on a scale that will make the 2008 crisis look like a minor correction. I've been analyzing real estate markets across the country for over 40 years, and I can tell you that what's happening in these 3 states represents a new type of economic collapse that goes beyond traditional market cycles. When states implement policies that drive away businesses, destroy local economies, and bankrupt their governments simultaneously, property values don't just decline temporarily, they collapse permanently. The warning signs I'm seeing in these states are the same indicators that preceded the collapse of Detroit, the bankruptcy of Stockton and San Bernardino, and the economic destruction of once prosperous regions that never recovered their previous wealth levels. But this time, we're talking about entire states, not just individual cities. If you own property in any of these 3 states, if you're thinking about buying property there, or if you're considering relocating to these areas, you need to subscribe to this channel right now and understand exactly what's happening before you make financial decisions that could destroy your wealth for generations. Let me start by explaining the fundamental factors that determine whether a state will prosper or collapse over the long term, because understanding these factors will help you evaluate not just the 3 states I'm warning about, but any location where you might consider investing or living. The first factor is fiscal sustainability, which means the state's ability to balance its budget without driving away taxpayers or destroying its economy through excessive taxation. States that consistently spend more than they collect in revenues eventually face bankruptcy, either explicitly through formal default or implicitly through currency debasement and economic decline. Fiscal sustainability requires reasonable spending levels, efficient government operations, and tax policies that don't drive away the businesses and individuals who generate the revenue needed to fund government operations. When states violate these principles consistently, they enter death spirals where declining tax bases force higher tax rates, which drive away more taxpayers, which forces even higher rates in an accelerating cycle of destruction. The second factor is business climate, which encompasses tax policies, regulatory burden, infrastructure quality, and the overall ease of operating profitable enterprises. States that make it difficult or expensive to run businesses eventually lose their economic foundations as companies relocate to more friendly environments. Business climate affects property values directly because commercial real estate depends on profitable businesses, and residential real estate depends on employment opportunities that provide incomes for potential property buyers. When states drive away their business bases, they eliminate the economic foundation that supports property values. The third factor is demographic trends, particularly whether the state is attracting or losing working-age populations with the skills and incomes needed to support property values. States experiencing outmigration of productive residents while attracting populations that consume more government services than they generate in tax revenue face unsustainable demographic mathematics. Demographic decline creates vicious cycles where reduced tax bases force service cuts or tax increases, which accelerate outmigration, which further reduces tax bases. This cycle continues until the remaining population can't support the infrastructure and service levels that made the area attractive in the first place. The fourth factor is infrastructure condition and the ability to maintain and improve essential systems like transportation, utilities, and communications. States that can't maintain their infrastructure due to fiscal constraints or political dysfunction become less attractive for business investment and residential development. Infrastructure decay accelerates once it begins because deferred maintenance becomes exponentially more expensive than regular upkeep. States that fall behind on infrastructure maintenance often face impossible choices between massive tax increases and continued deterioration that drives away economic activity. The fifth factor is political stability and the predictability of policy changes that affect business and investment decisions. States with extreme political polarization often implement policies that change dramatically with each election cycle, creating uncertainty that discourages long-term investment and business expansion. Political instability also affects state credit ratings, borrowing costs, and the ability to fund essential services during economic downturns. Investors avoid locations where policy changes can eliminate their returns or create unexpected costs that weren't considered when making investment decisions. The three states that are failing catastrophically on all these factors share common characteristics that make their decline irreversible under current political structures. They have implemented tax and regulatory policies that drive away businesses while attracting government-dependent populations. They have unfunded pension obligations that require massive tax increases or service cuts. They have infrastructure that's deteriorating faster than they can afford to repair it. Most importantly, these states have political cultures that prevent them from making the difficult decisions needed to reverse their decline. Instead of addressing fundamental problems, their political leaders double down on policies that accelerate the destruction while blaming external factors for problems they created themselves. The first state that's experiencing complete collapse is California, where a combination of extreme taxation, regulatory overreach, and social policies has created an environment that's becoming uninhabitable for productive businesses and individuals. California's decline represents the most dramatic example of how progressive policies destroy economic foundations. California has the highest income tax rates, the most restrictive business regulations, the most expensive housing costs relative to incomes, and the most dysfunctional government operations of any major state. These factors have created out-migration rates that exceed immigration for the first time in California's modern history, representing a fundamental reversal of historical demographic trends. The out-migration from California isn't just about high costs. It's about productive people and successful businesses abandoning a state that has become hostile to success and achievement. The remaining population increasingly consists of government employees, welfare recipients, and ultra-wealthy individuals who can afford to insulate themselves from the consequences of the policies they support. This demographic shift is unsustainable because government employees and welfare recipients don't generate the tax revenue needed to support government operations, while ultra-wealthy individuals have the mobility to relocate their income and assets to avoid taxation when rates become confiscatory. California's unfunded pension obligations alone exceed $500 billion, which represents more than the entire annual state budget. Meeting these obligations requires either massive tax increases that will accelerate outmigration or benefit cuts that will create social unrest. Either choice leads to economic and social deterioration. The housing market in California represents a particular disaster because property values have become completely disconnected from local incomes and economic fundamentals. The median home price in many California markets is 10 to 15 times median household income compared to historical norms of 3 to 4 times income in healthy markets. The mathematical impossibility of California's housing market becomes clear when you realize that median home prices require household incomes of $200,000 to $300,000 to qualify for mortgages, but median household incomes in most California markets are $70,000 to $90,000. This gap can't be sustained without external subsidies or speculative investment that's already beginning to disappear. California commercial real estate is collapsing even faster than residential as businesses flee the state's oppressive tax and regulatory environment. Office buildings in San Francisco and Los Angeles are trading at 50 to 70% below their pre-pandemic values because remote work has eliminated the need for expensive California office space while companies relocate operations to business-friendly states. The retail real estate situation is even worse due to policies that have made shoplifting effectively legal and created unsafe environments that drive away customers. Major retailers are closing hundreds of California locations because theft losses exceed profit margins, creating dead zones in shopping centers and urban areas that may never recover. The second state experiencing complete collapse is New York, where a combination of fiscal irresponsibility, regulatory excess, and social policies has created an environment that's driving away both businesses and high-income residents at accelerating rates. New York's decline represents the collapse of what was once America's financial and commercial capital. New York has implemented tax policies that specifically target high-income individuals and successful businesses while expanding government spending and benefits for non-productive populations. The result is a demographic inversion where the people who generate tax revenue are leaving while the people who consume tax revenue are increasing. The numbers are devastating for New York's future. The state lost over $300 billion in adjusted gross income from out-migration in recent years, representing the departure of some of its most productive residents. This income can't be replaced by taxing the remaining population at higher rates because that would accelerate the out-migration of the remaining productive residents. New York's unfunded pension and benefit obligations exceed $200 billion, which requires either massive tax increases or significant benefit cuts. Given the political impossibility of benefit cuts, New York will implement tax increases that make the state even less competitive and accelerate the departure of tax-paying residents. The New York City real estate market specifically represents one of the most dangerous investment environments in the country due to rent control policies that make rental properties unprofitable, commercial policies that favor tenants over property owners, and tax policies that make property ownership increasingly expensive relative to potential returns. Commercial real estate in Manhattan has lost over half its value since the pandemic, as companies realize they don't need expensive New York office space for remote, capable operations. The financial services industry that supported New York's economy is relocating operations to lower-cost states with more favorable tax and regulatory environments. New York's infrastructure is deteriorating rapidly due to fiscal constraints and political priorities that favor social spending over maintenance and improvements. The subway system, bridges, tunnels, and other essential infrastructure require hundreds of billions in investment that the state can't afford without driving away more taxpayers. The third state experiencing structural collapse is Illinois, where decades of fiscal mismanagement, political corruption, and union control have created an unsustainable economic environment that's driving away businesses and residents while accumulating massive unfunded obligations. Illinois has the worst credit rating of any state except those that have already declared bankruptcy, reflecting fundamental fiscal problems that can't be solved without dramatic political changes that seem impossible given current power structures. The state's credit problems increase borrowing costs and limit access to capital markets during economic stress. The Illinois pension crisis is the most severe in the nation, with unfunded obligations exceeding $150 billion, representing more than 3 times the state's annual revenue. These obligations grow faster than the state's ability to generate revenue because benefits were structured assuming investment returns and population growth that haven't materialized. Chicago specifically represents an urban disaster that's accelerating Illinois' overall decline. The city faces massive population losses, declining tax revenues, increasing crime rates, and infrastructure problems that make it unattractive for business investment or middle-class residential development. Illinois manufacturing has disappeared due to high taxes, excessive regulation, and infrastructure problems that make the state uncompetitive for industrial development. The loss of manufacturing eliminated middle-class employment opportunities that supported property values in communities across the state. The agricultural sector that once provided economic stability for rural Illinois is declining due to tax burdens that make farming unprofitable and inheritance taxes that force family farms to sell to cover tax obligations. This agricultural decline eliminates the economic foundation for rural communities that depend on farming-related activities. All 3 of these states share common characteristics that make their decline irreversible under current political leadership. They have implemented policies that prioritize government employee benefits and social spending over economic growth and fiscal sustainability. They have created regulatory environments that drive away businesses while attracting populations that consume more government services than they generate in taxes. The political cultures in these states prevent them from making necessary reforms because the beneficiaries of current policies control the electoral process. Government employees, welfare recipients, and ideologically motivated voters outnumber taxpayers and business owners, creating permanent political majorities for policies that accelerate economic decline. The demographic mathematics in all three states are unsustainable because they depend on small numbers of high-income residents and profitable businesses to fund government operations that benefit much larger numbers of non-productive residents. As the productive populations leave and the dependent populations grow, the mathematics become impossible regardless of tax rates. The infrastructure in all three states is deteriorating faster than governments can afford to maintain it because deferred maintenance has created massive backlogs while current revenues are consumed by pension obligations and social spending. The result is accelerating deterioration that drives away economic activity. The timeline for complete collapse in these states is accelerating because the underlying problems compound rather than stabilize. Each business departure reduces tax revenue and employment opportunities. Each productive resident who leaves reduces the tax base while often being replaced by someone who consumes government services rather than generating revenue. The housing markets in all three states face fundamental problems that go beyond normal market cycles. When states lose population, businesses, and economic activity permanently, housing demand declines permanently. Property values in declining states often take decades to recover if they recover at all. The commercial real estate situation in these states is even worse because businesses have alternatives that didn't exist in previous decades. Remote work, improved logistics, and digital technologies allow companies to operate from anywhere, eliminating the locational advantages that once forced businesses to accept high-cost, high-regulation environments. The municipal bond markets in these states are already reflecting deteriorating credit conditions with higher borrowing costs and reduced investor demand. As fiscal problems accelerate, these states will face increasing difficulty accessing capital markets for essential infrastructure and operations funding. The federal government will be unable to bail out failing states because the scale of obligations exceeds federal capacity without creating inflation that destroys the currency. Federal aid might delay collapse temporarily, but can't solve the fundamental policy and demographic problems driving the decline. The most tragic aspect of these state collapses is that they're entirely self-inflicted through policy choices rather than external economic forces. These states have natural advantages, educated populations, and infrastructure that should support prosperous economies if governed competently. Now, let me tell you exactly how to protect yourself from these collapsing states and where to deploy your real estate capital for maximum safety and growth potential. Because while California, New York, and Illinois are destroying wealth, there are specific states that are attracting businesses, population, and investment capital that will create exceptional opportunities for prepared investors. If you currently own property in any of these three disaster zones, your priority must be exit strategy planning rather than hoping for recovery that isn't going to happen. The longer you wait to exit, the more difficult and expensive it becomes as property values decline and buyer pools shrink. For California property owners, the key insight is that the outmigration trend is accelerating, not slowing. Every month that passes brings fewer qualified buyers for California real estate, while more sellers enter the market. This supply-demand imbalance will continue worsening until property values reach levels that reflect local California incomes rather than speculative investment or external buyer demand. If you have substantial equity in California real estate, consider selling now and redeploying that capital to states with growing economies and stable political environments. The tax consequences of selling might seem painful, but they're minor compared to the wealth destruction you'll experience by holding California real estate through its inevitable collapse. New York property owners face similar circumstances, but with additional complications from rent control laws and property tax policies that make real estate ownership increasingly unprofitable. New York's regulatory environment is so hostile to property owners that many buildings are being abandoned rather than maintained because operating costs exceed rental income potential. The New York exit strategy should focus on speed rather than maximum price, because market conditions are deteriorating rapidly. Accept reasonable offers rather than trying to optimize pricing in a declining market where waiting often results in lower net proceeds after additional carrying costs and further value declines. Illinois property owners, particularly those outside Chicago, face the additional challenge of limited buyer demand due to the state's reputation for fiscal instability and high taxes. Rural and suburban Illinois properties may require significant price reductions to attract buyers who understand the long-term risks of Illinois ownership. For potential investors evaluating opportunities in these states, the fundamental principle is simple. Avoid them completely, regardless of how attractive current prices might appear. Falling prices in declining states often represent value traps rather than genuine opportunities because the underlying economic problems continue getting worse. The mistake many investors make is thinking they can profit from distressed real estate in collapsing states by buying at low prices and waiting for recovery. This strategy worked in previous decades when state declines were temporary and cyclical, but the current declines in California, New York, and Illinois are structural and permanent under current political leadership. Instead of trying to catch falling knives in disaster states, focus your real estate investments on states that are benefiting from the outmigration and business relocation from the failing states. These opportunity states offer superior demographics, business-friendly policies, and fiscal sustainability that support long-term property value appreciation. The first tier of opportunity states includes Texas, Florida, Tennessee, and North Carolina. These states have no state income taxes or low tax burdens, business-friendly regulatory environments, growing populations, and diversified economies that don't depend on single industries or government spending. Texas specifically has become the primary destination for businesses and individuals fleeing California's hostile environment. Major corporations, including Oracle, Hewlett-Packard, and Tesla, have relocated operations to Texas, bringing high-paying jobs and tax revenue that support property values and economic growth. Florida has attracted massive inflows of high-net-worth individuals and businesses seeking to escape New York's confiscatory tax policies. The combination of no state income tax, business-friendly regulations, and attractive lifestyle factors has created sustained demand for Florida real estate across all market segments. Tennessee and North Carolina offer similar advantages with additional benefits, including lower overall costs of living, central geographic locations for business operations, and state governments that prioritize economic growth over social engineering programs that drive away productive residents. The second tier of opportunity states includes Arizona, Nevada, Utah, Georgia, and South Carolina. These states offer many of the same advantages as first-tier states, but with different risk profiles and growth characteristics that might appeal to specific investor preferences. Arizona and Nevada benefit from California outmigration, but face challenges including water availability and dependence on tourism and entertainment industries. However, their tax and regulatory advantages continue attracting businesses and residents seeking alternatives to California. Utah offers exceptional economic growth, conservative fiscal management, and demographic trends that support long-term property appreciation. The state's business-friendly environment and educated population make it attractive for technology companies and other high-value industries. Georgia and South Carolina provide southeastern alternatives with lower costs than Florida and North Carolina, while offering similar business advantages and population growth characteristics. These states are particularly attractive for manufacturing and logistics operations. The investment strategy for opportunity states should focus on markets that are directly benefiting from inflows of businesses and high-income residents from disaster states. Look for areas where major employers are expanding operations, where population growth exceeds national averages, and where local governments maintain business-friendly policies. Residential real estate in opportunity states should emphasize markets with job growth in high-paying industries rather than just population growth from retirees or government-dependent populations. Employment-based demand creates more sustainable property appreciation than demographic shifts that don't increase local income levels. Commercial real estate opportunities in growth states often provide exceptional returns because businesses relocating from high-cost states can afford higher rents while still reducing their total occupancy costs. Industrial properties are particularly attractive as companies relocate manufacturing and distribution operations, but success in opportunity state investing requires understanding local market dynamics and avoiding areas that might seem attractive but have underlying problems. Even growth states have markets that face challenges from local government dysfunction, infrastructure limitations, or dependence on volatile industries. The timing of opportunity state investing is crucial because the migration trends creating these opportunities are accelerating. As conditions in disaster states continue deteriorating, the pace of business and population relocation will increase, driving up demand and prices in destination markets. Early positioning in opportunity states provides the best risk-adjusted returns because you're investing ahead of obvious trends rather than chasing markets that have already recognized and priced in the migration benefits. The key is identifying markets that will benefit from continued outflows rather than those that have already captured most of the gains. Geographic diversification across multiple opportunity states reduces concentration risk while ensuring participation in various migration and business relocation patterns. Different opportunity states appeal to different types of businesses and residents, so diversification captures broader trends. The tax implications of relocating from disaster states to opportunity states often provide immediate benefits that improve investment returns. Moving from high-tax states to no-tax or low-tax states can increase disposable income significantly while reducing the total cost of real estate ownership. Estate planning advantages in opportunity states often include more favorable inheritance tax treatment and asset protection laws that preserve wealth for future generations. These long-term benefits compound over time and become increasingly important for substantial real estate portfolios. Here's what you need to do immediately to protect yourself from the disaster states and position for opportunities in growth markets. First, honestly assess your exposure to California, New York, and Illinois real estate, and begin planning exit strategies for any properties in those states. Second, research opportunity states that align with your investment objectives and personal preferences for potential relocation or investment focus. Visit these markets, understand local conditions, and begin building relationships with local professionals. Third, begin systematically building positions in opportunity state real estate while reducing exposure to disaster states. This transition should be gradual to optimize tax consequences and timing, but it needs to begin immediately while opportunities are still available. If this analysis has convinced you that state-level policy differences create permanent advantages and disadvantages for real estate investment, share this video with anyone considering property investments or relocations. Subscribe to this channel for ongoing analysis of state and local market conditions. Leave a comment below and tell me whether you have exposure to the disaster states and what steps you're taking to reposition toward opportunity markets. The community of investors who understand these state-level trends needs to coordinate strategies and share market intelligence. Remember, real estate is always local, but increasingly it's also political. States that implement policies favoring economic growth and fiscal responsibility will attract investment and population, while states that prioritize ideology over economics will continue declining. Position yourself accordingly while you still have time to make the transition successfully.